Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Congressman Krishnamoorthi's Town Hall on Immigration with special guest David Leopold. The town hall will begin in just a few moments. We ask that you please submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to every one of your questions that we can. We know that you have many things on your mind, so without further ado, let me turn this over to Congressman Krishnamoorthi. Congressman, the Zoom is all yours.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining. And sorry for the lack of notice with regard to this particular kind of what we call a pop-up town hall. But there was so much interest in this particular topic, we decided that let's just have a town hall with an expert to kind of go over what we've learned so far this week with regard to potential immigration law changes. And I just want to introduce our guest, Mr. David Leopold, who is well known in this particular field. He is the current president of AILA, and AILA just does a wonderful job of helping numerous people with their immigration law challenges, and they've helped our office quite a bit over the years. But I could go on and on about David, but suffice it to say that we have a true expert on all things related to immigration law, and somebody who can really help guide us since he has done so expertly in Congress. He has actually testified in Congress several times, and his list of accomplishments is very long, but he's one of the best lawyers in America on this particular topic. So we're very fortunate to have him. David, if you could first walk us through the categories of changes as you understand them briefly. Then I will ask some questions, and then I'm going to ask questions that people from our audience are asking. So if you could take it away and first summarize, as you understand them, the changes that have occurred so far through executive action and otherwise.
Certainly, and thank you so much. It's quite an honor to be here, be with you, and be with your constituents. I am the past president of AILA, so just to make sure that everybody understands. The current president will get upset if I don't say that, but I was the president of AILA. It's a great group, you're right. So let me go through the executive orders on immigration, the main points that I think people will be concerned about that will affect us day to day, in our homes and in our communities. Number one is the change of enforcement priorities. What are those? President Biden made it a priority to go after and arrest and detain and deport people who committed serious crimes, crimes of violence, and so forth. What's gone on is they've thrown out those priorities, and the priority really, in essence, is going to be anybody they can get their hands on. We're hearing in the media that, yes, it's criminals, but if you listen very carefully, what they're saying is anybody else who they see along the way is fair game. And what we saw during the first administration of Mr. Trump was that people who were not criminals, simply undocumented because they could not find a path to citizenship, were subjected to the deportation, to the mass deportation. And speaking of mass deportation, we will see roundups, but I think what we will see is many folks have what's called an old deportation, a paper order from a judge. Maybe they missed their hearing, their immigration hearing. Maybe they didn't get notice of the hearing. Maybe they simply didn't have a pathway because the law is so old and needs to be updated and hasn't been updated. And they're under a final order, and they have to report every month or so to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those folks are probably going to get called in and get what's called a call-in letter. This is under the mass deportation plan, and they'll go into ICE, what's called Immigration and Customs Enforcement Field Operations Office, the Enforcement and Removal Office, and they will be either ankle braceleted or taken into custody and removed. So on the mass deportations, also they will be removing what's called sensitive location memo. This is protection against sensitive location. So it used to be that unless there was a national security threat, or unless there was a violent criminal or something like that, they would not go into a church or a synagogue or a mosque or any religious place. They would not go into a hospital. They meaning ICE, immigration. They would not go into a university or a secondary school or an elementary school without authorization from headquarters. That's gone now. So they will be going into those locations. So those locations are not off limits without permission from above. That's a big change. And I think for folks who are worried, and this is important, everybody in this country has constitutional rights, whether you're documented, whether you're not documented, however long you've been here, whether you're a citizen or whether you're not a citizen, everybody is protected by the United States Constitution, which means nobody can enter your home generally, unless they see a violent criminal running in with a gun. Nobody can enter your home without a judicial search warrant. So if you do hear the knock on the door, this is, you are entitled to ask. I don't care whether you're documented or not, you're entitled to ask to see a judicial warrant for the home, for the searching the home. And they can slide that warrant under the door or show it at the window. But that's a really important point, and that applies to everybody. And during a mass deportation, we'll see that tested. And also there's the issue of birthright citizenship. People have been asking a lot of questions. That was one of the main executive orders that came out yesterday. A lot of media on it. Basically, what's going on is President Trump has taken the position in an executive order that the children of undocumented women where the father is not either a United States citizen or a legal permanent resident, a green card holder, that those children are no longer citizens as of 30 days from the issuance. So that'll start in mid-February. Also, the children of people who are here on temporary visas, so H-1B visas, L-1, TN, visitor visas, have students in school, medical doctors who are training and others in training programs, their children, according to this executive order, are no longer considered U.S. citizens when they're at birth, unless the father is a U.S. citizen or is a permanent resident, a green card holder of the United States. That's been challenged already. It directly contradicts the 14th Amendment. That's been challenged by 18 states, at least at last count. My prediction is that it will be enjoined, it'll be stopped, but nevertheless, it'll travel through the courts over the next several months or years. I think finally, what's really important is that, folks are vulnerable, folks are worried, many folks are in panic. I'm getting calls all the time. Be very careful of people who offer you something that sounds too good to be true, or who want to take your money but are not lawyers. Make sure that if you go to get legal assistance, that the person you're dealing with is a licensed attorney. There's plenty of pro bono or low-cost legal services that you can look to. American Immigration Lawyers Association has a list on its website of lawyers who are licensed in your area. And I strongly recommend that you go to a licensed attorney, not to somebody who just says they know their way around immigration. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have, Congressman.
David, thank you so much. And I should have said at the very beginning, AILA is American Immigration Lawyers Association. It's the premier such organization, and we're very, very glad to have its former president. And hopefully we'll meet the current president as well at some point. We have a lot of questions, David, a lot of questions streaming in. Let me start with DACA, questions about DACA, because that seems to be a category of people who I think it's not entirely clear how they're being treated under these executive orders. But I ask you, for instance, with regard to folks who are DACA recipients, would they be considered ones? Let's just take the birthright citizenship order, for example. How do you interpret that order being applied to a mother, for instance, who's a DACA recipient?
Yeah, so a mother who is a DACA recipient doesn't have an immigration status other than DACA. So her child under this executive order would not be a US citizen. Unless she's married to an American citizen or somebody with a green card.
Now, again, going back to this birthright citizenship order, since it is something that is literally it's impending within 30 days. You say it's going to be going through the courts. During that time that it's going through the courts, how do you view the legal kind of impact of that order, even as it's being litigated? Should people assume that that is now the law of the land? How should they go about viewing that and the impact of that in their lives?
That's an outstandingly good question. Here's my advice, my thinking on this. Let's assume that it does get blocked by the court, by a court, and then it starts to travel up through the appellate system, which takes time, and into the Supreme Court. Assuming that what the court does is it can stop the order in its tracks. It's called a stay, while all the other courts consider it. All right, and so it blocks it, and then that would stay the effect of the order. Okay, my hope is that that's what happens. I can't guarantee it, but that's my hope. That's my prediction. That means that the executive order is not in effect anyway. So the child is considered a citizen. The existing law is not changed. So what I would recommend, and again, my advice is a general advice. Please don't take anything I'm saying here as legal advice. And I really wouldn't act on anything that I say because I don't know your particular case. So it's always good to get the advice of somebody who understands your particular situation. But that said, generally speaking, I would go and apply for a passport for the child as soon as possible. Passport is
even before they're born?
No. They have to be born first.
Okay.
Let's be born. Let's assume that they're born after the effective date, right?
Yes.
And let's assume that there's a court has blocked everything, but it's on appeal. I see no reason why somebody can't apply for a passport. Now it's going to depend on the time, the nature of what the judge does. And it's also going to depend on how the Trump administration reacts. So they're saying that they're not going to issue passports. Now that's in the executive order, but if that executive order is blocked, they're going to have to issue passports. Also the states, I would get birth certificates, certified birth certificates, get every document you need for your child to show that your child is a US citizen. Because this is going to be subject to, if it continues, it'll be subject to a lot of litigation. And the best thing to have is the documentary proof that the papers that show your child is a citizen under the law as it exists today.
Okay, so obviously we're going to continue to get a lot of questions on this particular topic. And I know that there are a lot of moms out there who are expecting, who are probably maybe even 30 days away from delivering.
Right.
And so why don't you contact us, and I'm going to give my number right now so that if anybody needs help, contact me at 847-413-1959. We'll put it in the chat. Also email il08.helpline@mail.house.gov. And you can contact us, and we have an excellent staff that will help you, and we'll enlist AILA lawyers as well in certain cases. Okay, I'm going to go to another topic, David, even as we continue to get questions on this particular one about birthright citizenship. Okay, what does the resumption of remain in Mexico policy mean? And just as a practical matter, how does that affect what's going on right now?
So remain in Mexico was a policy that the first Trump administration put into place whereby people who intended to apply for asylum in the United States registered, were given sort of a place in line, and then had to remain in Mexico until they were called in for their hearing in the United States. Then they would come into the United States, and presumably under the auspices of the Border Patrol, would attend their hearing in whatever the city was on the U.S. side. El Paso was one of the central places where this was occurring. That's remained in Mexico. There were a lot of problems with that policy. I can go into those if you want, but that's what's been reinstated. And under that policy, asylum hearings were at that time heard in the U.S. It could be, if they go forward with it, that they could send the judges over to the Mexican side. I think there'll be all kinds of jurisdictional questions with that, technical issues. But that's essentially what remain in Mexico is.
Next question. Let's talk about, you mentioned something very important, which is the removal of the sensitive places memo, which otherwise discouraged or prevented ICE from going to schools, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, places of worship. This is something that is that we're getting questions about. What should one of those places do? How do you view the import of the removal of this memo, and what should those places do if ICE officers appear at the door?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So a couple things to think about. Number one, what that was basically ICE saying, we're not going to go into these places unless you take it to the headquarters because they're so sensitive. They don't have to do that. Now they're saying they're not going to do that. So I don't think there'll be a legal challenge to removing that memo. That was just a memo. So ICE can do that. They can go into these places. But that doesn't mean that the Constitution is taken away. So whether it's a church, whether it's a synagogue, whether it's a university or a school, there are rules that apply. Number one is the Fourth Amendment of the United States, which protects us from unlawful searches and seizures. So I think if you're a pastor in a church, if you're a rabbi, if you're an imam, or if you're the dean of a school or the principal, it's time to think about a plan, right? Because it's time to understand exactly what are the rights of the church or the rights of the religious institution if law enforcement, if ICE comes knocking at the door. They're going to need a warrant, is where I'm going with this, a judicial warrant, not an administrative, but a judicial warrant. That said, it's also extremely important to understand that nobody under the law can hide or surreptitiously, hide anybody who's the focus of law enforcement. That's a felony. It's called harboring, and people have to be really careful about that because they could get themselves, even though they feel they're doing a good deed, they could themselves be charged with a very serious crime called harboring.
Just to clarify on that, the harboring, I'm glad you brought that up because that's important. The harboring inquiry, or the inquiry or the question about whether someone is harboring, I gotta believe that also turns on whom they're harboring, right? So if it's a violent criminal or somebody with a deportation order, for instance, that would be a much more clear case than one that has to pertain to some other more vague issue or vague category of offense. Is that fair to say, or am I incorrect?
No, you're not incorrect. I would just broaden it a bit. I think that what people have to understand is even though the rhetoric, campaign rhetoric, and even the post-inauguration rhetoric, that what they're talking about is going after criminals. In reality, you don't need to be a criminal to be to be the subject of a deportation. People who just simply have overstayed their visas, or people who arrived decades ago but never got their paperwork. they can be arrested, deported, and, removed from the United States. So for example, if somebody is not a criminal, but ICE has an order, ICE wants to remove them. ICE, has what's called a final removal order, and they go and they hide they go to a church to get sanctuary. ICE can enter that church. If they see them go in, they can enter without a warrant. If they have probable cause to believe that they're in that church, or whatever institution it is, then they can get a warrant from a judge. So it doesn't have to be a criminal. It can be anybody who could be removed from the United States.
So I understand what you're saying. Okay, now I'm going to turn to some audience questions. I've got a lot. I'll try to do these first come, first serve. Well, the first question is about, does an executive order need approval of Congress? And I think the answer is no, it does not. The next question that I have is, it has to do with Illinois being quote unquote a sanctuary state. And my question is, there's actually language in these orders talking about how the federal government might withhold funding from certain places if they don't enforce federal law. How do you view that? And are we seeing any evidence of that beginning to happen in light of what different officials are saying and so forth?
Well, it's a little early, but we will see evidence of it happening or starting now. The executive order, one of the executive orders, speaks directly to this, and as you correctly pointed out, Congressman, they're going to use the threat of withholding federal funding. Now, there could be technical legal challenges to that, namely the 10th Amendment, because the federal government is not supposed to be able to coerce the states into doing its bidding. That said, this administration will, if they do what they say they're going to do, and we take them at their word, try to withhold funding. So who does that hurt? That hurts healthcare. That hurts students in school. That hurts anybody who is receiving federal funding. And we'll see how that plays out. In the first administration, there were lawsuits on this point. Most of them were successful. And I think what we have to remember is that there is nothing in the law that requires state and local government to do immigration enforcement. And in fact, that is the province of the federal government. So it's when they say sanctuary, that's a word that just sounds like they're allowing people to huddle somewhere and not be. ICE has always been able to enforce the law robustly and rigorously inside of any place, whether it's Illinois, any place in Illinois, Chicago, even though that they don't necessarily, the state and local officials don't necessarily, turn over information to ICE. So what they're saying is that if you don't affirmatively turn over that information, we're going to withhold federal funding. So that's going to another one that's going to have to play out in the courts.
Okay, I think I have several questions about refugees, essentially. How do you view the executive orders impacting local refugees? And will humanitarian parole end for Ukrainian ones, for instance? But if you can talk about the whole category of refugees.
Yeah, well, on refugees, the executive order as I read them, put a pause on the refugee resettlement for about 4 months, and asking for a report. I think we'll also see a reduction, if not a complete stopping, of the refugee program of people coming into the United States, which is, I'm sure I don't agree with that kind of a proposal. I think that is the essence of why this country was formed, to form a safe haven for people. But the president does have wide discretion when it comes to the numbers of refugees that are admitted on a yearly basis. So I think what he's done here is he's asked for a report as to how this program should be implemented over the next several months. I guess we can imagine what will come back, but we'll wait.
Does that mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. For people who are already here, who were granted refugee status, maybe I'm misreading the executive orders. They're not doing anything to alter their status or to change the benefits that they may have currently, right? It's about future
Yes,
refugees.
Congressman's future. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Okay, got it. Okay, I've got several questions about H-1Bs as well. How do you do you see any impact on the processing of H-1B visas through these particular executive orders at this point? Whether this person is an international medical graduate physician, but how do you see these executive orders affecting H-1B visa holders, with the exception of the birthright citizenship issue, which we covered already?
Right. There's nothing in these executive orders that touch upon H-1B visas or J-1 exchange visitors or international medical trainees doing their residencies here, or anybody else in any business category. That said, we've got ways to go before all of the executive orders are issued and before the USCIS, that's the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, starts to adjudicate cases under the current administration. And what we saw during the first Trump administration was very restrictive adjudications, very, very restrictive approach to H-1Bs. But the H-1B program is statutory. The only people who can change that are you and your colleagues in Washington, Congress. It cannot be changed unilaterally by the president.
How do these executive orders? Another question that's come up is people are worried about past adjudications or past decisions by either ICE or USCIS with regard to their immigration status. Is there anything in these immigration executive orders that would lead you to believe that past decisions could be revisited in some way?
Well, no, but past decisions can always be revisited. And perhaps what the individual is asking about is, are they going to give deference to previous, when they approve something before, are they going to defer to their previous approval? And just before they left office, the Biden administration issued final regulations on this, which includes in those regulations requires deference to past, meaning that if they've approved a case before, they should approve it again unless something material, something big has changed. Now that regulation, that rule could be rescinded, could be taken away, but it was a final rule, so it'll take a while before they can do something like that. So at the moment, that's good. We're safe.
Okay. Well, this is an interesting question. Is the Canadian border being treated differently than the Mexican border, as you understand it, for purposes of these executive orders?
Yeah, these executive orders speak specifically to the southern border. They don't speak to the Canadian border.
So, in other words, it will be business as usual at the Canadian border, as far as we can tell, whereas there will be changes in terms of what's happening on the southern border.
Yeah, I mean, these executive orders, they're talking about asylum, they're talking about remain in Mexico, they're focused on the migration of individuals from Central America, primarily coming up and applying for asylum. That said, I think that if somebody is on a visa and is going to travel, they should, at a minimum, seek the advice of counsel, maybe of your office, before they do so, because we know on a moment's notice, things could change in terms of how people are received when they come back. We all remember the travel bans that came in effect, and there is an executive order that says that the various agencies of the United States government should give a report to the president within so many days. Now, I think maybe 6 months, I don't remember the exact time, as to whether we should be issuing travel bans. So I think we will see some travel bans.
Well, that was the next topic I was going to get into. And by the way, I'm just going to repeat this again. My number is 847-413-1959. If you have questions, please call us and we'll try to help. Okay, I'm just going to give tell me if I'm totally wrong about this to say this, but if you are not a citizen or a green card holder, if you plan to travel internationally sometime soon, just be really careful. Our experience during the first couple years, actually first 4 years, I guess the first term of the Trump administration was that people had trouble returning if they were not a green card holder or a U.S. citizen from overseas travel. And especially at different ports of entry, including O'Hare, for instance, O'Hare International Airport. It became a big problem when people came back and their initial visas were then almost re-adjudicated at the airport by CBP. And so we don't know what's going to happen. Okay.
And I think, Congressman, maybe
Yes.
can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
When people travel overseas, whatever device you're carrying, cell phone, computer, your WhatsApp, your iMessaging, or whatever message service you use, it's fair game. Your photos are fair game. So I always tell people when they travel and they come back in the United States, don't have in your device anything that you don't want CBP to look at.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Obviously, we had the Muslim travel ban, and a lot of my Muslim American constituents are very worried again about this. As you might recall, we had a lot of challenges at the airports, and I went to O'Hare to help free a couple dozen Muslim green card holders who were being detained. Talk to us about this. What are you seeing? I think that it appears that the Trump administration is now going to go and look at the vetting procedures in various countries around the world for terrorists, suspected terrorists traveling here from those countries. How do you see this playing out? I know there's a long line of cases that went to the Supreme Court addressing this particular issue, but from a very practical standpoint, how should people be thinking about this if you're, for instance, Muslim American?
Yeah, first of all, like I said, whether you're Muslim American or any other religion or nationality or faith, don't travel with anything that you do not want somebody. And I'm not trying to be nefarious. I'm not trying. You could have something on your WhatsApp. Maybe your cousin sent you a video of a major media. That's it could be anything, and they may think, well, okay, so and so has a picture of X, Y, and Z. They'll turn you back. They will turn you back. I've seen cases like that. So I think there's no one size fits all, but I think what's really important, the takeaway should be that before, whether you're a green card holder, whatever your situation is, talk to your office before, or whomever you designate they should talk to, whatever attorney you may, whether it's an AILA attorney, talk to somebody who knows what's going on before you get on that plane and leave the United States, because things can change day to day, and procedures can change and emphasis can change. So what I'm saying, what we're talking about today, it may be a different situation in a week from now, and it may be too risky for someone to travel, even if they're a green card holder, because the risk of not being allowed back in just went up.
That was what I was going to touch on. You mentioned green card holders themselves need to be concerned.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about green cards. I keep my green card at home to avoid losing it. I instruct my wife and kids to do the same. I understand that we are supposed to carry it at all times. What could happen if we are stopped by an officer and we don't have it on our person? What's the practical? What should the person do?
Yeah, that's a great question and an important question. So 2 points. Number one, make sure that your green cards are up to date. Some people forget to keep them up to date, and that's a problem, because it could be a criminal violation and it could be a civil violation leading to deportation, something as simple as not renewing your green card on time. So renew your green card if it's expired. If you're a temporary visitor, make sure that you've complied with all the registration requirements. The law does require it. They have not enforced it because they just have not had the funds and the resources to enforce it, but they say in these executive orders that they're going to enforce all registration requirements. The law does require a green card holder to carry their green card on their person when they're out. So I recall the reason that this has come up before. Shortly after 9/11, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Cincinnati, Ohio, announced that no longer would they not prosecute people who didn't have their green cards on them. It's a federal misdemeanor. It's a federal misdemeanor. So my advice is to carry the green card, next to your driver's license, wherever where you're going to keep documents. Keep a copy of it. You can take a picture of it and scan it into your system so you have a copy of it. If you lose it, you can get a replacement. It's not hard to get a replacement, but there's nothing wrong. Keep the original. You should keep the original on your person, like a driver's license.
How about if you're a naturalized citizen? Do you need to keep those papers
No,
with you?
not on your
Okay.
person. No.
Okay, got it.
But that's Congressman. That said, if I could, they're going to be instituting what's called expedited removal, and we can talk about that if you want.
What is that? Tell us what that is.
Yeah. So under the law, under the laws that exist, Customs and Border Protection, or ICE as well, can if an individual is not in the has entered the United States illegally. And does not have documentation to show that they were lawfully admitted. In other words, they came in somehow, and they can't prove they've been here for longer than 2 years continuously. They can be just removed without a hearing. And it used to be that they would only apply that rule within 100 miles of the border. The executive order says, no, now we're going to apply it all over the country. So the reason I say for a U.S. citizen, let's be really honest about how this works. People of color are more likely to be stopped. I'm not trying to make a political statement. It's fact. And you need to be able to prove pretty quickly that you have documents or that you've been in the country for more than 2 years. For folks who are undocumented and who entered without inspection or came in as children without, over the border, without going through the channels, I think it's really important now to piece together at least the past 2 years in the United States. Have a folder of documents, if not, and scan that into a system so that if you're arrested, if you're encountered, you can call your spouse, you can call whomever is and make sure that you can prove very quickly that you've been in the United States for 2 years or more. I know that sounds really ominous, but it's very important.
Okay. Okay. Well, I have a question here. If I have a work permit and I'm in line for my permanent residency, he or she said, am I safe?
Well, I don't know the exact circumstances. If person has applied for legal permanent residency, that means they've got an application pending, and I assume with a work permit, comes with a work permit. Safe is a relative word. Your presence in the United States is authorized, but immigration takes the position that you are not legally in the United States. You're not lawfully in you're not in a lawful status, and that you're here is what they're here because they're just allowing you to be here to wait for the judgment on your green card. So legally speaking, you're eligible to be removed from the United States. I know that's not a comforting answer, but to ask the question, I'm going to give a straight answer.
Okay, that opens up a lot of questions.
Sure.
So when somebody has a work permit, so they're authorized to work here, am I basically understanding you correctly to say that basically you are authorized to work here, you have status to work here. However, that doesn't necessarily mean well, we already talked about birthright citizenship. That doesn't mean your child under the executive order, if they were born here, would be a citizen. But are you also saying that you could be subject to removal for under some other, I guess, under what circumstances would you be subject to removal?
So suppose somebody had a visitor visa and they applied for a green card based on their marriage, and the green card and the visitor visa expired and they remained in the United States, which is absolutely lawful. If you've got a green card application pending, you're fine, but you're not in you are not in an immigration status. You're not in a lawful immigration status. You are in what's called you're permitted to stay, but you're not in a green card status. So what that means is, theoretically, ICE could arrest you, detain you, and put you before an immigration judge. Now, the reality is they're not going to do that, because all you would do is tell the immigration judge, I'm married to a citizen and I'm waiting for my green card. And the immigration judge would presumably just dismiss the case, but they could do that. Where does it come up? It comes up typically if there's another reason. So if that person, commits a theft offense, or if there's some sort of other reason why they would go after him.
I
They're
see.
not in a lawful status.
You're just in greater jeopardy if something else happens to you. It could be a DUI.
Correct.
It could be some other offense. Even though you're not undocumented, you are working, you have a work permit, you're somehow legally permitted to stay. So long as you're not in a permanent residency status, you are in jeopardy of going into the detention process or going before an immigration judge and having to explain yourself, essentially.
Right. If you don't, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, so stop me, but that's if you do not have any underlying visa. Remember I said that. So for example, the H-1Bs, right? A lot of those folks remain on H-1B and then they also apply for their green cards. They're fine because they're in a underlying lawful status. So if their green card is denied, they still have their H-1B.
Okay.
Talking about folks whose underlying status, whether it's their H-1B or their student visa or whatever it is, has expired, and all they have is the green card application. That permits them to physically be here and to work.
Okay.
It doesn't give them lawful status until, like you pointed out, they get the green card.
Okay. Got it. All right. Well, we are coming up on time. We could keep you here for a much longer time. Maybe I'll let you offer a closing set of remarks, and then maybe I can do the same. And then, as I said before, we're here to help with specific questions, but go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I think people have to remember a couple of things. Number one, like I said at the outset, everybody in this country, no matter what you hear on television and no matter what, this person or that person might say, everybody in this country is protected 100% by the United States Constitution and has rights. And, if I were looking for help and I didn't know where to go, I would call the congressman. I would call the office to see what they suggest I do. Great source of information, people who know what they're doing. And also, I think, do not make any moves in immigration. Do not file anything with anyone with the assistance of anybody who is not an attorney. Very important, because you are responsible even if that person is tricking you or doesn't know what they're doing. So you want to make sure that you go to a licensed attorney, and like Congressman Krishnamoorthi said, American Immigration Lawyers Association has a list of lawyers that are licensed and in your area. So I strongly recommend consulting with an attorney about your particular case. This is not a one size fits all. Everybody has different circumstances. And then number two, just remember, immigration goes back and forth depending on who's the president. Sometimes it's more restrictive, sometimes it's not. There are things that are going to happen over the next 4 years that we can't yet predict. We've seen a few things yesterday. Everybody's got to sort of take a deep breath, seek advice, and find out credible sources of information. And tuning into a call like this is the best thing you can do, because you're getting hopefully you get incredible information here.
Well, David, thank you so much. You've been just very generous with your time. You're terrific, a terrific font of wisdom and knowledge with regard to this very, very, very complicated topic. And literally, the news is kind of coming out, as we speak with regard to changes in our immigration law and these executive orders. I'm just going to repeat this again. Please call us at 847-413-1959 or visit my website, and we will do everything we can to help walk you through and work with people like David and the excellent attorneys at AILA. And we will all collectively deal with this in a productive, constructive manner. And let's, as David said, take a deep breath and get clarity on exactly your personal situation and how the law applies to you, and let's move forward accordingly. David, thank you so much, my friend, and thank you to everybody for tuning in, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.